convenience. But today we are honored to be joined by Assembly Member Phil Ting. He is the chair of the Assembly Budget Committee and a member of the Utilities and Energy Committee. In addition, we have with us Carolyn Choi, LABC board member and senior vice president of corporate affairs at Edison International and Southern California Edison, and our good friend Paul Jennings, an LABC member and a principal at PCS Energy. Our speakers today will address the newly revised California state budget. I feel that the Assemblyman is fresh from that experience. In addition to issues about how we're going to meet our clean energy goals, and also the hope for federal assistance in doing so. And then we're also going to look more specifically at how the major utilities are doing, what the impact of COVID-19 has been for them, what it looks like in terms of rolling out our electrical vehicle charging stations, local solar and storage. At the end of each presentation, we will have a few minutes for Q&A, followed by a short legislative update by our LABC VP of Programs, Adam Lane. If you'd like to submit a question, feel free to. During the presentations, you can use your Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. As you know, the LABC has been working diligently at this time with our local, state, and federal partners to advocate for policies and programs. We've been focusing on the budgets and programs that keep renewable energy and transportation projects moving forward. And much of this is tied to the COVID-19 stimulus funding. Today, we are honored to have the Assembly member with us. He, as you know, is the powerful member and chair of the Assembly Budget Committee. He has the daunting task of addressing our projected budget deficit for this year. He is also a member of the Utilities and Energy Committee, Business and Professions Committee, Revenue and Taxation Committee, where he was formerly chair. During his time, and he has been elected to the Assembly since 2012, he has prioritized progressive issues, which has protected our environment and authorized key legislation that included direct emergency aid to California cities and counties for homeless housing and services. Thank you very much, Assemblyman. And he's laid the groundwork for assessing current and future electric vehicle charging station needs, and he has worked to simplify the Cal Grants application process, among many, many other issues. It's really a pleasure to have you today, Assemblyman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mary. Really appreciate that. And thank you so much for the LABC for your incredible leadership on clean energy issues. I'm really honored to be on a great panel. I think clean energy is an amazing story for California. If you think about it, it's something where really the private sector and the public sector together created a whole new industry in California. And really California has led the way in the United States. If it wasn't for the private sector, many of these new technologies would never have been invented. But if it also wasn't for public support, for the right incentive programs, for the right research and development tax credits, for really proper budget levers, the industry wouldn't be able to grow or flourish the way it has. And frankly, because California became a beacon of clean tech, more and more people have come to California to start their companies here, been drawn to California to really work on these issues. And so something that I'm extraordinarily proud of, and it's a sign of really what government and the private sector can do when we put our heads together and we work together to solve a common problem. And really what our common problem is, as you've probably articulated for years, is fighting climate change. Knowing that we have millions of Californians who need to live everyday lives and need to have everyday conveniences, such as being able to drive to work, drive their kids to school, be able to have heat, air conditioning, things like that. How do we allow those modern conveniences while at the same time be able to manage and mitigate the impact on our environment? So if you look at how the legislature and the governor has really approached it, was a couple tools. One is making sure that there was the proper regulatory framework, making sure you told people what they could do, what they couldn't do, set aggressive goals so that you have them far into the future. you can look at things like SB 32. You can talk about our 100% renewable energy goal, which Caroline and her company was an instrumental part of that discussion. And you could look at all the various regulations happening at the state air board as well as the local air boards. But you also look at all the levers and the budgetary incentives. You can go back to the Go Solar program that the state worked with all the various utilities on to provide proper incentives for solar energy, and we really achieved our goal where now solar energy is as cheap as fossil fuel energy to utilize. We're trying to do the same thing with clean cars and making sure that we have the proper clean car infrastructure, but that we also continue to incentivize people to buy clean cars so that we have cheaper clean cars and plenty of different types of clean cars out there. I was proud to author two bills, AB 1046, which really looked at having a long-term view of our clean car funding program, but also AB 2145, where we had a goal of 1 million EV chargers by 2030, and making sure that we're doing everything our part to unshackle, frankly, the private sector to allow that goal to really occur. This is something that I know that we can't achieve unless we are working together. This year, we're hampered a little bit because the legislature was forced to recess for almost 2 months. And because of that, we had to reduce our bill load package quite a bit. So I was not allowed or able to really pursue my EV and clean car bills personally, but I continue to be very, very committed to that in the long run. We have, unfortunately, a $54 billion shortfall. We're working very closely with the governor to try to figure out how to properly address that shortfall. Unfortunately, the only good thing that has happened out of COVID-19 is we've seen a reduction in pollution. With the reduction in pollution, though, has meant that we anticipate having fewer revenues with our greenhouse gas reduction fund program, and that's where many of our clean energy, clean car programs are being funded. So we're going to have to figure out how we continue to fund these programs, but at lower levels of funding. So those are things that we're going to be continue to look at and to address. The environment has changed very, very quickly. If we had this call end of February or beginning of March, I'd be saying a very different thing. I'd be talking about the investments we'd be making. I'd be talking about the money we were looking to spend or thinking about spending instead of talking about the programs that we're looking to cut or trying to protect. And so it's a very different environment that is constantly changing. But what I do know is our need for clean energy, our need to develop and grow this clean tech economy is more important than ever. And I'm really honored to be able to be here today, work with many of your companies to continue to push forward that goal. And I know there's so many other government officials and elected officials who really share those same goals. And again, happy to take your questions and really excited to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you, Assembly Member. And you've been a good partner to us for years, and we really appreciate the work that you're doing and look forward to the questions and answers. It's now my pleasure to introduce Carolyn Choi. She is the Senior VP of Corporate Affairs at Southern California Edison, and one of the nation's largest electric utilities, its parent company, Edison International. Carolyn is responsible for overseeing government affairs, public affairs, corporate communications, and corporate philanthropy on the national, state, and local level. Previously, she served as Senior VP of Regulatory Affairs and VP of Energy and Environmental Policy at SCE. Before joining SCE in 2012, Choi was Executive Director of the Environmental Services and Strategy at Progress Energy, doing permitting, compliance, and policy. She served the company in various roles, including Director of Energy Policy and Strategy and Manager of Federal Public Affairs. So please welcome Carolyn.
Well, thank you, Mary. It's great to have this online panel discussion. What a great way to kick off the unofficial start to summer, right? So and it's a pleasure to be here with Assemblymember Ting and Paul Jennings to talk about, our shared commitment to clean energy and addressing climate change. Our vision at Edison is to lead the transformation of the electric power industry toward a clean energy future. And so I'm going to share some examples of that, of our efforts to make that happen. But before I go there, I do want to just say that our thoughts are certainly with those who have been affected by COVID-19 and the pandemic. Of course, that's everyone, but particularly those who've been directly impacted. The past several weeks have certainly highlighted the essential nature of the service that Southern California Edison provides to customers and communities. During the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders, it's really been critical that the 15 million people that we serve have reliable electric service. So because we provide an essential service, Southern California Edison did not close. And one thing that didn't change during these times is our commitment to the safety of our employees, our customers, and our communities. So with that in mind, we transitioned about 2/3 of our workforce to teleworking. We've been at it for now, I think 10, maybe 11 weeks. So it's become quite the norm for many of us. And then for those employees who could not work from home, and many of our field employees who keep the lights on, climb the poles, string the wires, and in our grid control center, they are taking precautions as well. So we have sequestered some. They're certainly practicing physical distancing and some of the other recommendations from the CDC. So their critical work does include preparing for what is quickly approaching the wildfire season, which starts, officially on June the 1st. So we certainly don't want to trade one crisis for another. The governor made clear in his revised budget last week that he's continuing to prepare to respond to wildfires, and he thinks that needs to be a top priority going into the 2020 wildfire season. So our grid hardening efforts are continuing, including the installation of insulated power lines and devices that sectionalize circuits so that we can minimize the outages that may occur. We're enhancing our situational awareness with micro weather stations, integrating more advanced fire modeling and weather forecasting, and then managing vegetation in high fire risk areas. So it's all part of our efforts as well to not just prepare for wildfire risk, but part of our efforts to adapt to the changing climate that we're already experiencing. Understandably, with many adhering to state and local safe at home guidelines, the customers and jurisdictions have expressed concerns about any of that work that may require temporary power outage. And so we, of course, recognize the difficulty that any power outage creates, and certainly one with so many people now working and learning from home. So we've worked to reschedule work to nights or weekends. We've taken other steps to minimize the impact of that critical work, whether it's through doing it hot, which means electrified if it's all possible, bringing in larger backup generators if possible, and doing other measures to help minimize that impact. Certainly, especially for the vulnerable customers, businesses, and other critical service providers that are part of the response to the outbreak. So I can provide more information about what we're doing for our customers for anyone that's interested. So let me turn to the topic at hand, clean energy. On that, and I think I have some slides. So our Pathway 2045 commitment, we are very much wholeheartedly committed to maintaining the goals of the state and to achieving those state climate ambitions, both for greenhouse gases as well as air quality. As Mary, in Southern California, we have an issue there as well. So recognizing that we are the health, social, economic challenges that have been created by the COVID-19 pandemic we're experiencing, and we know that that certainly has changed the landscape for climate action to a certain degree, we still believe that we cannot let up on the progress that we've made and the work that still needs to be done to address climate change and decarbonize the economy. Our CEO, Edison International CEO, Pedro Pizarro, is the only utility sector representative on the governor's task force on business and jobs recovery. And so he is serving on both the leveraging positive change and the climate subcommittees. So working to help ensure that as the state emerges and moves towards recovery, that it's doing so in a sustainable way and one that makes us more resilient than before. So like I said, we're very much committed on continuing our work to help our customers and communities make clean energy choices. Last year, we released our 2045 white paper. This was a data-driven analysis of the steps that California needs to take to both clean the electric grid and then reach carbon neutrality by 2045 in a cost-effective manner. And it really was a response to SB 100 that passed in 2019. So those steps include 100% clean energy to retail businesses and customers, as Assemblymember Ting mentioned, We also believe that it requires to do the decarbonize the economy in a cost-effective way, electrifying 70% of buildings, electrifying 75% of transportation. Some of them Ting also mentioned that as a real need, and certainly in Southern California, with the number of cars and trucks on the roads contributing to air quality challenges, this is a real need for that as well. So 3/4 of all passenger vehicles, 26 million cars, 2/3 of all medium duty trucks, vehicles, and then 1/3 of all heavy duty vehicles being electrified. And then we would use low carbon fuels for technologies that are not viable for electrification. So there is still a role for natural gas. It's just a significantly reduced role. And we're also losing alternative fuels to replace some of that as well. So our analysis shows that California is going to need 80 gigawatts of new utility scale clean generation and 30 gigawatts of large scale energy storage if we're going to meet the 2045 carbon neutrality goal. So I'll just take a quick moment in the next slide to highlight SDE's recent announcement of a 770 megawatt storage procurement. We just announced that a couple of weeks ago. It's one of the largest ever in the United States, and that will come online by August of 2021. So just one of the many steps that we're taking in the years ahead to help enhance the region's electric reliability, as well as helping to achieve clean energy goals. Those 7 projects will more than double all of SDE's previous energy storage projects. So we have 690 megawatts as of March of 2020, and so this will more than double that. Our Pathway 2045 analysis also includes an additional 30 gigawatts of generation capacity and 10 gigawatts of storage coming from distributed energy resources. So if you want more information about Pathway 2045, just go to edison.com/Pathway 2045 to learn more. And we definitely know that these are ambitious goals. They're going to require significant investments in the coming weeks and decades. Something that Ting referenced the fact that we are in tough fiscal times. A lot has changed in 10 weeks from where we were before. So difficult decisions definitely are ahead for members of the legislature and the governor's office on how we're going to rebuild collectively, but how do we do that in a way that also is sustainable and helps to achieve the goals. I've definitely been encouraged by what Governor Newsom has said, and certainly other leaders in California, some of them were Ting just now, but certainly like CARB Chair Mary Nichols and the Energy Commission Chair David Hochschild last week on the same webinar. So I think, again, making smart and effective investments can help California get back to work, and through clean energy projects, through energy efficiency, through transportation electrification, through electric vehicle manufacturing, and not just the vehicles, but automotive parts and services. These are all, and then building electrification. These are all things that we think can be done as part of the recovery, and that will help build a more sustainable and climate resilient state. So I can talk more about what Edison has done, but to close, California has a strong clean energy economic grounding. More than 500,000 jobs when we counted in 2019. And so even though we're experiencing these difficulties now that have been unprecedented in our lifetimes, we do remain committed to that clean energy transition, to a transition to a clean energy economy. And I don't think, again, we can push the pause button. So we signed on to and fully support the clean energy stimulus proposal at the federal level by the LA Clean Tech Incubator, their transportation electrification partnership. We're also members of the Leadership Council there. And that proposal represents an investment package to create jobs, reduce air pollution, and build climate resilience in the transportation sector nationwide. It also includes $25 billion in tax credits and other incentives for buyers and manufacturers of clean vehicles. We think that's very important to help spur the market. $85 billion for grid upgrades to support chargers for electric vehicles, trucks, and buses, and then $12.5 billion for workforce development and job training. So we're proud to be joining PCS Energy and LABC and something over Ting. And we definitely see opportunities for recovery, growth, and investments as we move through and past this pandemic to emerge more sustainable and resilient. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Carolina, and we really should thank you again, because Edison's Leadership, you've been pioneers in in making these goals achievable and showing that there's a path to them. And you came out early. And I remember when you had the first 80% plan, which I think is now at least a year or two old.
Yeah.
At least 2 years old now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so you did, there's just no question that Edison is a leader, and your CEO Pedro Pizarro is really a gift to California, and the importance of this federal legislation and this package that you're talking about that Lacey's leading on, and how important that is. So I think I think Adam will get to that at the end about why we're supporting it and how important it is, and certainly the Assembly member knows how important it is, those federal dollars. So thank you for your time and your leadership, and we will find your slides and we'll bring them back, I hope, for the Q&A period.
Okay.
We'll post them because you did a terrific job communicating a lot of information without them, so thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Jennings, who is the principal at PCS Energy. PCS is one of LA's largest producers of solar energy for commercial, industrial, and institutional properties, and installers of electric vehicle chargers. Paul has over 40 years of experience owning and operating technology and real estate companies. In 1995, Paul formed a real estate company specifically after the Northridge earthquake, constructing more of, being part of helping reconstructing Los Angeles after the earthquake in the San Fernando Valley, and particularly multifamily buildings. Paul has used his experience to remain active in real estate and develop while creating and operating a renewable energy company synergistic to the real estate space. So you just keep evolving, Paul, from one success to the next. So most recently, Paul and PCS Energy have become some of the biggest providers of EV charging stations to the LA area, and have a unique understanding of the future interplay of solar, storage, and electrical vehicles. So Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Always enjoy sharing our thoughts. We have some unique lenses. Some would say I need corrective lenses, but nevertheless, through my experience of 40 years, I think we have a unique set of experiences that happen to be particularly relevant to the fields we're in today. And those two fields, as Mary said, we put a lot of the large feed-in tariff projects on building roofs, because we're real estate folks and we have this technology background. That was interesting to us to begin with. Plus, we understood the whole concept of microgrid, and you want to produce energy where you make it, and et cetera, et cetera. But the one that has just blown us away in the ability to collaborate between the Carolines, the Assembly member Phil, Mary, and all the agencies is the momentum we are picking up in the EV charging space. There was this, and actually, before I get too far down that rabbit hole, I'm going to back up for a moment and say this. The other thing I want to talk about very quickly, I've actually believe I've had Corona, so let me address this, because I'm 40 pounds less. I had it back in December, and I'll say, for the folks who haven't had it, or the folks in your workplace and the folks in your family and your communities, it's real. And one of the hardest things about, I think I found navigating this and, believing have it, is how to respect others and treat them, with the respect in terms of everybody experiences this whole crisis differently. And that's, on one hand, that's one of the tough parts on it. On the other hand, that's one of the denominators that we're finding we're able to get people to move in the same direction. So just wanted to share that experience, that I think the more sensitive we are to how complicated Corona is and how it affects each person, each family, and ultimately there's a big disparity between what folks' work is. Even our company, we have folks that are every day, frankly, being exposed on a different level than folks like myself who can sit behind a computer. So again, I just find it's complicated and a time for increased sensibility before responding to people who may be upset or angry, because you don't know what's going on in other people's lives. And I believe that will hold true for the next 12 months. Hence, I'm a big believer. I love my metaphors. So my attitude is stay the course. I have a unique lens in the sense I've seen big crises before. I'm old enough to have seen them, and I love using the earthquake as a great example. I'm an optimist. I'll say this, and I say this cautiously, and I say this having experienced Corona myself, is that the Corona will have more positive outcomes, and that's not to take from the pain, the suffering, the confusion, the anxiety, and all the other things. But we as people make our best moves when there's a big crisis. And I can say after the earthquake, the best thing that happened after the earthquake, because you can't change the earthquake, was how the city pulled together. I believe Mayor Reardon, there's a reason I'm sharing the story. I don't believe Mayor Reardon gets his due for what the city did at that point. And what it came down to is people threw out all the rigidness between departments. They had a bigger enemy. So to me, one of the things that will come out of the coronavirus is hopefully a pulling back together and collecting smart people's consensus to where the world needs to go. The beauty is unequivocally, and Mary's has heard me say this multiple times, unequivocally today, renewable energy is cheaper than any form of fossil fuel. And because of Moore's law, and because of the way electronics work, and because how technology develops, it's only heading further down that road. We are there, folks. We can now produce energy out of thin air for less than you can do it with oil. And that's oil even at today's prices. The problem is the marketplace distorts that on everybody. So what have we done to address it? Is we have bought all our employees EV cars so that we can actually get real data testing. We went out and we installed 8,000 EVs in a very logical, methodical way, which was looking to see how it would really be. So rather than distorting how the EV will work, we took it from a whole different approach and said, let's put it in real apartments, let's put it in real office buildings, let's fill it out as the program requires, which is a program that we're benefiting on carbon taxes. So through the carbon funds being collected, we've been able to deploy 8,000 EV chargers in approximately 600 buildings. And what we're getting now is great data to what the real usage looks. And I can say this to the credit of Caroline, the assembly member, DWP, the notion of what's happening out here in California, where we get it, that the whole key is maximize the number of charges so the public understands it's here for the duration, and it is as simple as physicality of lots of chargers. And we have lots of market data and all that tells us that. So we're excited with that. The other thing we're doing is we're rolling out a program to the disadvantaged. We're going to try to get 100 used EV cars out to the marketplace. Why? Because we believe there's such a positive economic story that EVs are going to bring to the table. And I think that's the underlying theme, is that I personally believe there is no turning back after this crisis. I believe the public awareness and people's awareness of what's really happening in the world. I think the economics, and when I say we're here, look, it still takes years, just like in telecom. It took 35 years, but if you look across the board, what's happening in all aspects of electrification, every one of the elements, we have real players nibbling at the edges, developing technology, because the economics, and this is the part which I think having a wholesale change like we're about to have in the energy world is a positive thing. The whole issue is when you start creating the correct economic modeling to go with energy, which simply says if you use peak energy in peak period, there should be a difference in pricing. We're going to get there because of technology. It'll allow us to do it. And once we have an economic pricing that goes with, let's say, the EV, it's going to get more and more efficient. People will figure out when to charge a car because it's more economic. We'll figure out how to price the calls to get them to fill their cars when it's the most least expensive way. And because we'll have smart things talking to smart things, not everybody needs the power at the same rate that they need it. So essentially, it's having thousands upon hundreds of thousands and millions of charges that will all, which is called Internet 3.0, smart things talking to smart things, collaborating back to the Carolines of the world, the regulators of the world, figuring out how to create pricing schemes that starts aligning real cost to real energy. And the beauty is, folks, for 2 cents a kilowatt hour, we pull energy out of thin air. I know it sounds kind of corny, but sometimes when I step back, I look at it and say, why aren't we further down this road? And my view, it is two reasons. One, the incumbents are brutal. They make piles of money, but their party's about over. And the most important part, and this is where I think it all really comes down to, and this is why this election is so, so important. I think if you get, and I'm a centrist, so don't get me wrong on this statement. If you get all of the same party and they all are thinking in a similar line and they all believe in, you know, global warming, the beauty to this is like the railroad in our past, or this is like the interstate freeway, which we built for civil defense, but turned out to be the greatest economic boom for the 70s, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Little history in there. We had a huge deficit at the end of World War II. Why did it go away? Because we built the interstate freeway system that led to our single biggest economic boom. So you move out 2-3 years from now, we have a new administration, we have smart people thinking, we have private industry that has validated the economics, which we can do, that EVs and, you know, electrification is the future. And you're going to see the transformation of several $1 trillion that sit in the energy pockets, and they are the contributors to the crappy air, to the world flipping around. Because once they realize the economics are here, one thing great about human natures, and it's like a smartphone. Folks, we were only 13 years ago without this. So I'm going to give you a number, and I want each of you to see if that number makes sense. If you have $1 trillion, could you go out and replace every internal combustion engine car in this country? Do the math. So when we start throwing around trillions of dollars to get this country back on its feet, I believe smart people will come to the conclusion one of the best places to spend that infrastructure dollars will be on electrification. Why? Because besides Stewart's purchase, actually, Louisiana Purchase was the US government's best investment. The second best investment is Stewart Purchase, Alaska. The third best investment is the Hoover Dam. I always like to say, Mary's heard me say this many of a time, we're building little Hoover Dams out there. So the point is, what makes renewables so unique is its infrastructure. This is the interstate freeway system. So what we need, and California is leading the way, and I'll talk a moment about the carbon tax, how important what has been set a long time ago by Governor Schwarzenegger. I can say we as a company are a great beneficiary, and I want to take a minute to explain it because, you know, it'll give a little explanation to why these programs that the government puts together are so important. You know, it's a type of economic thing that, like the interstate freeway system, nobody could have done it except the government. But when they did it, everybody benefited. We found a way to tax it and support it, and we all know it today. Same thing will happen in electrification. It's not clear yet how the government should do it, but this is a massive project that the government can take on, get electrification going, the implementation down to the end user to get these internal combustion cars off the road, frankly, and this is going to sound like, you know, I'm off on a different planet. It's not that difficult if we put our minds to it. So I would say this, if you're enjoying the fresh air out there and you see clear air, if we really want it, we have all the technology and all the pieces in place. We can have it in 10 years. And for that endless debate, and this is the one part I really don't get, Mary, is, you know, for the endless debate of storage, we need storage. Folks, 80% of the water you pump up a hill, you regain that energy back when you drain it down. So I think what we're going to find is a healthy, constructive conversation, which will have some effect on the environment, which is called hydro. But conversely, and this gets back to kind of, you know, the argument of nukes versus coal, what we now know, you know, even nukes, for all its bad doing, it's still a reasonable conversation to say nukes may be better than coal when you look at the destruction that the fossil fuel and all those things are doing. So I think the longer we are in quarantining, I think the more human nature, the human population of the globe gets to see what the real alternative for us is, which is green air. And then once smart people like us figure out how to best illustrate the economics are there, they're there in a big way, we get the right political environment going in Washington, D.C. I'm an optimist. Take any one of those three out of the equation, we're going to be slugging it out, and we'll be spending more time on what you all know was this green road that we thought we would be winding around and getting to the other side, and it keeps getting another twist in it. So I actually believe because crisis people come together, I'm an optimist that we're going to get on that straight road point to a direction, and all this will work out, including the unbelievable deficit they're about to undertake, because we're going to do what humans do. We're going to create a way to be more productive and literally pull energy out of the thin air.
Thank you.
Leaving on that note, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's because of this kind of innovation and creativity that we are able to be successful. And the Assemblyman talked about that in the beginning, that this is a public-private partnership that's gotten us where we are today. Definitely the incentives and programs the government has created has helped create this industry. And Assemblyman, I have a couple of key questions in that area, as you can imagine. If you don't mind, I'd like to start to ask you first. How do you feel that the current subsidies for clean energy adoption and EVs are going, and will they continue to be funded despite the revenue challenges?
Yeah, the good news is they are funded through a special fund, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Yeah. Now those are paid through corporations, companies. They pay they buy credits to offset their pollution. The challenge is right now. The good news is, again, there's a whole lot less pollution right now because we're staying at home. So that revenue stream is going to come down. I don't know if Mary talked about it. The chair of the air board has the ability to raise the price of those credits. I had heard that was under consideration. I've also heard that it's not under consideration. So that would be a way to raise more money for these programs. But there was a huge bump last year in those programs. This year there is less money. So the problem is you have somewhat of a cyclical funding stream. It's just purely special funds, so we don't add additional general fund money to it. I've had an idea to try to make the clean car program or the clean vehicle rebate program sort of a much more of a finite program, kind of like the Goal Solar program, where you say, hey, we're going to do it for 10 years. We're going to start high, then we'll come down over time. But it's only going to be for 10 years or until we hit the 5 million car goal, whichever is there fastest. So if you hit the 5 million car goal before 10 years, program's over. But the whole point is once you hit the goal, which is great, we want to celebrate, the program's done. And I think it creates a real incentive, and it creates a time frame, and it also creates a sense of urgency. Right now, I think the program is flawed because the program is $2,000 for everybody, and you could buy your car tomorrow, you could buy your car next year, you could buy your car, in 10 years, and it's still $2,000. So what incentive do I have to get the car today? I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to keep the old car. So anyways, we will be continuing that, but probably at lower levels than we'd like.
Got it. And then follow up with that, how is the state going to prioritize funding for clean energy and emission reduction programs in disadvantaged communities that are hardest hit by COVID-19? Great
question. There's already a set formula for certain categories that about 25% goes into disadvantaged communities. And it's a great sounding definition, but unfortunately the disadvantaged communities in my community, in my neighborhood, in my 9-county Bay Area really are sort of excluded. So it's unfortunate that it wasn't a real all-encompassing definition of disadvantaged communities, but there is money set aside and there will continue to be money set aside for that current definition of disadvantaged communities.
And then Carolyn, you talked about it a little. How dependent are you on the state programs and the private sector to achieve your EV goals and your infrastructure goals? How does that look for you, given what's going on at the state?
So our EV goals to try and get more of them on the road do rely on state funding. So our programs, the utility programs, we do have a clean rebate program that's leveraging funds through the low carbon fuel standard. So it's actually paid for by oil companies, but it's dispersed through the electric utility. And so that is, again, a state program. Our infrastructure programs are paid for by customers. So the Public Utilities Commission approves our infrastructure programs. And of course, they go hand in hand. You need to have access to charging infrastructure for people then to go feel comfortable buying either a passenger vehicle or for businesses to go and procure medium and heavy duty vehicles. So our charge ready program. It's the umbrella. We have Charge Ready Transport, which is a program that was approved by the commission. And that is a $356 million program to get chargers at 870 sites across the 50,000 square mile service area. And then that is intended to help incent 8,500 medium and heavy duty vehicles to be put out in our service area. So the customers have to have a contract for the vehicles for us to put charging in their business.
Mhm.
And then our Charge Ready initial program was a pilot that was for passenger vehicles. So we put in about 1,300 charging stations across our service area, and we have an application pending now at the commission for a much larger program, almost 48,000 chargers that would be in our service area. So it's a blend of both programs at the utility that are approved by the Public Utilities Commission and paid for by customers, and then funding from the state that helps bridge the gap between a fossil fuel vehicle price and electric vehicle price. So those incentives are really helpful at the state level and the federal level to get those vehicles on the road. But I hear what the assembly member says in terms of they are flat. I mean, they've gone down actually, because we have had some success, but they are the same. And so there, I do think that's worth exploring as to how to incent people to get in those vehicles now versus later.
Sooner than later. Yeah.
Yes.
And Paul, your experience as someone who's actually delivering the infrastructure and connecting owners to this opportunity, I have a question for you about how you see the future of these programs and subsidies. And then also we're getting a question about, do you have opportunities for subcontracting and EV charging installations from your company? Is your company subcontract?
So we subcontract all our field work. We try to do it through minority businesses and other things. As you know, Mary, in our placement of these charges, we also try to do disadvantaged neighborhoods. We're actually going to come out with a program because used EVs, the marketplace is very inefficient. You can go online today, folks, and you can buy a used Leaf for about $8,000 for your kid and it'll last the next 20 years. I don't get why the marketplace hasn't recognized, but we're about to roll out a program to get a bunch of used cars for a disadvantaged community and start trying to understand how those economics play out. As I said, we have cars. So every one of my employees has a used EV. In the back of our office, we have 25 EVs. So we're getting data, these people all live normal lives. So what we want to understand, because one of the fallacies we believe is there is an absolute need for speed charging, but the problem with speed charging, there are 100 grand level 3 charges, 100 grand a whack. We've taken a completely different approach in large part by DWP and what I think will prove to be brilliant vision on their part, and that they are incenting us to put out the maximum number of chargers because they believe the more chargers, the more people will be willing to. Because what we all would agree today, putting out 1 or 2 chargers is silly. What happened in the economics of the business is if I'm a charge company, I got to show that I have a profitable business. So I have to try to force as much revenue on that charger as possible. Reality is charges can be made very cheap and everybody can have their own charger. So you don't have to have another day of charging anxiety. So that when you pull into your workplace or your apartment, we can get these things installed incrementally for a couple grand. Where it gets tricky is the managing of the power. So there is no way that we can justify, can DWP or public and society, you can't justify pre-wiring every apartment, let's say in Los Angeles, because it would take forever. Rather, we know we're in a world where we have adoption. We know we want to encourage adoption. So when people see lots of chargers, we're going to see the ramp up of energy. As we see that ramp up of energy, we have very tight monitoring within each apartment. And we have ways to control it at what we call the DMARC, create an ecosystem within the apartment so that if the utility company can't come running out and upgrade services, there's going to be options. We can drop a battery in place or do the obvious, just do a little pricing change on that particular building, change the pricing model to get people to change their charging habits. Mm-hmm. So what we're finding is there's all sorts of levers. And the one thing in the assembly member definitely gets is, and I'll say my experience as a business person, when you take the 2 levers, and let's say gas, put a little carbon tax on gas, take that money, because here we have put out $40 million worth of chargers. Now DWP can go back to the assembly member and say, we have a good program here. We have them in real buildings. They're done to, you know, the highest standard. And what LA's developing and California's developing, we are in a unique opportunity because we are the early adopters. So we have the opportunity to get real data. So what I can say to you is, we can give you real data to how users are going to do it. So when I say the economics are here, I'm saying because I have data from users and experience from users. And I'll tell you, there is so much misinformation. It reminds me kind of back in the day, you know, remember when we were kids with the Indian and the American trash, or maybe the smoking campaign. It's just a re-education process because we're so upside down in our understanding. Well, we've been, you know, buffaloed into this upside down understanding where we already know the more deep you get in electronics, the more efficient it gets, and the more it can be socialized with everybody. It's like a smartphone, you connect it with banking. What's going to take people out of poverty over the next 20 years is electronic banking. So you look at the aspect of what's in those apartments. We just got to get people in those cars. They will then find out how economic it is. But do not underestimate the incumbent fight we have on our hands. Does that answer your question, Leslie?
That's quite helpful, and you answered many questions actually within that question.
I tried.
Raised a few questions actually.
Now ask me a compound question to see what kind of answer you got.
Now I'm going to go back to Caroline for a minute because the audience would like to know, Caroline, from you, does Edison have a program in the pipeline for residential secondary meters dedicated to EV charging?
Secondary meters.
I'm assuming this is the virtual metering programs where there's more than one meter on a building. You know?
Okay. No, we do have specific charging rates for home charging, where a second meter is required. But I think most of our programs actually are, it's like our whole home charging program, for instance, or whole home rate actually is an incentive on its own because it usually people are charging at night anyway. And so the price of power overnight is much lower. And so we have that. We also did have a pilot to help with the chargers themselves. It was a pilot just to test to have the chargers be installed at people's homes, and also help with the upgrade to the power panel because some homes needed to have that. But our charge rate program itself isn't so much for an individual home. It's really, it does go after multi-unit dwellings, so apartment buildings, because we do see a real need there. Our pilot, when we started it, that was really the gap, was having apartment buildings go for the chargers, because you had apartment building owners and then apartment building managers, and neither really wanted to deal with owning the chargers. Right. So actually the pilot, the program expansion that we have put forward at the commission, one option would be to select utility ownership. And that's the only place that we're looking at having utility ownership is in multi-unit dwellings. We've been successful in getting chargers out in disadvantaged communities, mostly through the public option. So some of our cities and counties having participated in the program and putting those chargers at schools and other in the public buildings like city council buildings and that sort of thing, where those are accessible to the public, parks. But in multi-unit dwellings, we didn't see as much uptick. And so as we expand the program to the more than 48,000 chargers, that would be an option for the utility to have that, because we see a gap in that area. But you are piloting it. We already piloted, and that pilot is still underway. We got, the pilot was for 1,000 chargers, and then we got approval to extend the pilot while the commission considers a much larger program. And so we still have, bandwidth in that to continue that effort. But but the pilot does not include a utility ownership option. We really do count on the other members of the private sector to put in chargers as well. And so, so the charge points of the world, EVgo's, et cetera, they are in the business as well. And so, but in terms of the multi-unit dwellings, we just felt like that was a gap. And across our service areas, it was one that we wanted to help address, because those customers, to Paul's point, they also want to get into electric vehicles. I would also just add for Paul, or for others, awareness is a huge issue. You're right. and particularly for used vehicles. So one of the things we're doing with philanthropy dollars is working with community-based organizations, nonprofits, to help really increase awareness in communities around programs to help get people into vehicles. The availability of second use vehicles at a price point, as you were talking about, like $8,000, with federal and state incentives and the utility incentive, you can get into a used vehicle practically free, depending on the utility program. And so we're really trying to make sure that those communities are aware of those opportunities. And as more people get into electric vehicles, that just increases the secondary use market, because many people are leasing. I'm in a lease. This is my third electric vehicle lease. And so I think it's an opportunity, and also the models are expanding, as you all are well aware. So with that and the opportunity to have more longer ranges of the vehicles that are coming out, I do think we really see great opportunity in that marketplace. So.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. And Assembly, I'd like to come back to you and Carolyn or Paul chime in. There's a question about, is there funding for microgrid developments to help with resiliency and meeting renewable goals?
Yeah, not right now. Obviously, we know that wildfire season's coming upon us.
Yeah.
So I imagine as we continue to grapple with this wildfire issue, that we'll be looking at a variety of different solutions, but at this point, no.
You know, what's interesting about that, Mary, is because you got to get the economics. The economics are going to come in layers, because one of the points I say earlier about we look at installing apartments, which I would say to Caroline, you know, one of the reasons we're so clued into apartments, social justice. These are the people who actually will benefit most from EVs. Yes. So that's what excites us. And apartments have very unique problems because you have lots of parking spots and a house meter of 200 amps. So interestingly, one of the things that we see doing as the adoption increases is putting batteries out in order to be the fill gap. So utility is in endless pressure. Hence, we're creating real value for the utility. But equally important is that by putting those batteries in these locations, we start building grid resilience, because what each of these batteries do, and let's say eventually every department and every office had a set of batteries, that in itself, and they have reasons they need them, but that in itself solves a lot of the challenges that, you know, the Carolines companies and the DWPs of the world do an incredible job every day giving us power, and nobody really appreciates how freaking complicated it is to get your power every day. Right, Caroline?
That's right. That's right, Paul.
Yes. I appreciate what you do every day.
Well, thank you. It's not really me, I will say.
Well, I mean the whole organization.
That make that happen. But yes, I think people, you're right, don't understand the complexity, the physics associated with actually getting electric power to a home or business. I think microgrids are certainly an option. The Utilities Commission has a proceeding underway looking at microgrids. So that, of course, only affects the 3 investor-owned utilities in the state, but it is a way to start piloting the technologies. And Paul's absolutely right. Cost is really the key factor in where the microgrids are today. And the prices are coming down. The price of energy storage is coming down dramatically. The price of course generation is very much, it is already competitive. So if you compare those two together and then have the storage be storage that can last for longer than, you know, a few hours. Right now in the marketplace, that 770 megawatts that we purchased, for resource adequacy, it's a 4-hour period that it has to fill. Right. And but for storage to be truly something to help allow people to completely unplug from the grid, that storage has to be available for longer than 4 hours. And that the battery technology is really advancing rapidly. The national labs are doing incredible work in new battery chemistries. And again, the prices are coming down. As those prices come down, I think microgrids will become more of an option. But today, price is absolutely the biggest barrier, I think, to microgrid adoption.
And then, Mary, one quick point to just what Carolyn said a little bit earlier about the CPUC pilot they got approved for. This is why I was carrying legislation, AB 2145, to set a more aggressive goal, to set a goal so that all the IOUs, all the public utilities could also be part of the solution of installing more EV chargers. Right now, the public and the independent utilities have the largest amount of capital to go do this. They get reimbursed also when they build infrastructure. So they have a perfect incentive to go do it. But unfortunately, our PUC has moved way too slowly. I mean, just at a snail's pace, where they're not getting the authority to really build the amount of infrastructure they need. So when you hear about our low-income communities, our disadvantaged communities going to get access, well, right now, the public utilities and the IOUs are the ones who are serving those low-income communities. So they're already there. All they have to do is be able to expand their footprint, but right now they're tied with regulatory bureaucracy. So again, that's something that we're taking a look at the legislative level to try to streamline that, make it easier, set a benchmark, make it easier for them to go so they don't have to do all these. I mean, these proceedings, the only ones who win are the lawyers. The lawyers do great. Everyone else really hurts. And so for me, it's really, how do we go streamline that effort, take off those shackles from Edison, from PG&E, from LADWP, from SDG&E, from SMUD, all the different agencies who really want to just go. And that's how we're going to get the infrastructure that we absolutely need.
Yeah, and I think in the spirit of that, I was going to give you the last question, Assemblyman, about what we can do for you and what you consider the most important issue in this session, and perhaps what you consider the most important issue in terms of the federal assistance. Yeah.
Well, I think what I need from you is to really understand what the business community needs. What are the barriers that are getting in the way? Because that's what we don't hear often enough on the ground. And what would make a difference? Obviously, like everybody else, everyone says, well, money makes a difference. Well, then that puts you in line with everybody else. So that's, I got a line, a million people long going around the block, right? So that's not really a unique point of view. But if there are things that we can streamline, goals that we can set, bureaucracy that we can go cut, red tape that we can go cut, I think those are all great points that we want to hear about, because you're hearing about these issues on the ground and how we can make things work better together. And I think if you look at the creation of this industry, that's exactly what that partnership has been with the government. Paul mentioned it earlier. It was a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick, and a whole lot of holding hands. And I think that's the approach that we're going to continue with. And this has been just a huge boon to California. It's just the industry is growing, and it's really helped that we don't have to choose between clean air and a clean environment and a strong business economy. We can clearly do both.
Yeah, that's well said. And that's certainly been our mantra for the last 10 years. And it proved to be true economically. And coming out of this COVID, well, not coming out of, but as we deal with COVID-19, this is going to be key to our resilience and stimulating the new jobs that we're going to need for sure at the end of 2020 and 21. Do you have a last word regarding the federal government? What we should be focused at the federal government? Caroline brought up the issue of the Lacey package, which we think is critical. Do you have thoughts?
Well, I think in any kind of disaster situation, the federal government has the tools to act quickly. We don't, and the city doesn't, or the county doesn't, because we don't really have a fast way to borrow. We know eventually our economy will get better, so we could borrow, but we have a balanced budget we have to pass. The federal government's the only one who can issue bonds quickly, who can print money quickly, who really can borrow. So it really is working. We're working with the other, I would say, business communities across the country to really deliver that message to the federal government. We don't always feel like we get listened to in California. So I know our legislators up and down the state are really with us. It's really about convincing many of the other senators in particular who need to be convinced and get that help that we need.
Okay. Well, thank you all. This has been really terrific. We're going to take the Assemblyman up on his offer to give him the list of the barriers. We'll try not to prioritize money and go straight to regulatory and bureaucratic. We want to thank you for all you've done and continue to do. You're one of our heroes, Assemblyman in the legislature, particularly not just in sustainability, but also in housing. I'd like to thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
So, Caroline, we're so thrilled to have you today. And you know how much we love Edison and your CEO, Pedro Pizarro. And Paul, you just continue to innovate and make things possible, which is critical to our success. So we couldn't have had a better team today. And I'd like to end with Adam Lane, who's going to kind of recap quickly where we are in terms of how the business community can support these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary, and thank you all. It's been an interesting conversation, especially as we talk about kind of how we recover these efforts and how we continue to stimulate our clean energy economy moving forward, and especially post-COVID. So as Caroline and Mary both mentioned, we have supported LACI's request for the next stimulus package to include about $150 billion in investments for clean transportation. Hopefully this will take some of the burden off the Assembly member for providing us all the funding. So, as we go through the debate on the Senate side, we don't think the full 150 billion is likely to go through, but if we can salvage some of that funding to backfill our state programs, that would be a great step forward. The request is mainly aimed at manufacturing, assembly, infrastructure, supporting clean tech startups, and workforce development investments. So we're also tracking several key pieces of legislation at the state related to energy and environment. We were supporting several of the Assembly members' bills on the electric vehicle side, and we'll continue to track those in the next session and next year. We're also focused on Assembly member Eduardo Garcia's 3256. Bear with me, this is a long name, but it is dubbed the Economic Recovery, Wildfire Prevention, Safe Drinking Water, Drought Preparation, and Flood Protection Bond Act of 2020, which would place a measure on the November 2020 ballot for approximately $7 billion in bonds that would finance several climate protection programs in these areas. It was initially developed to fund climate resiliency measures, but it has since been updated due to the impact of COVID to also focus on economic recovery. So we're looking forward to see how the deliberations end up with that. We're also tracking AB 2255 by Assembly member Susan Talamentes Eggman, which is focused on increasing the state's long duration energy storage portfolio. Specifically, it's going to require the CEC and CPUC to include long duration storage in their integrated resource planning, and would also require CalISO to develop a competitive bid for long duration storage projects by March of 2021. And if you were able to join us for the webinar with Chairwoman Mary Nichols, we reported that we were glad to send in a letter supporting the state's advanced clean truck regulation that's currently being debated. It would mandate ultimately 15% of medium and heavy duty trucks sold to be zero emissions by 2030. This would be the first sales standard for electric trucks in the world, and it would help California significantly reduce transportation related emissions, which makes up the largest source of emissions in California. And as been mentioned before, it's due to these regulations and policies that we've been able to spur a clean energy economy and create good paying jobs in California. So we're glad to support that. In LA, we're focused on supporting DWP's push for 100% renewable energy by 2045, or hopefully sooner. We're one of the business groups on the advisory group for the 100% study, which is being conducted by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. This group has met for the past 3 years now, quarterly, and we're hoping to see a final modeling and analysis at the end of 2020. And we'll be discussing this and several other issues at our June 2nd Energy and Environment meeting, which is open to all of our members. If you'd like to attend, please let me or someone on the staff know. If you're not a member and you want to participate in these legislative discussions, feel free to reach out to us and we can provide you information on our membership. But that's it. If there's anything missing on our current radar, please reach out to us and let us know what we should be paying attention to. And I'll pass it back over to Mary.
Thank you, Adam. That was terrific. That was very comprehensive, and there still is, as you can see, quite a bit moving that we need to get behind. We encourage anyone listening to this today to join us in this effort. I have to take a moment to plug not only a happy Memorial Day weekend, but to join us first thing on Tuesday, where our very own chair, Nadine Watt, will be leading a discussion on the regional economy with the film industry, the International Trade Commission, and also the president of the Convention Center and Tourism regarding the impacts of COVID-19 on our regional economy. So feel free to join us at 11 a.m. on Tuesday. And until then, please have a safe, happy, and relaxing Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.